I was sitting in Uncle Ben's kitchen, laughing at old family photos with my cousin Marcus, when he suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to leave, right now. Don't ask questions." At first, I thought he was joking. His voice was too calm, too controlled. But then I looked up at his face, and I saw something I'd never seen before, in all our years growing up together. Fear. Real fear. Not the kind you fake when you jump at a horror movie or hear a loud noise at night. This was deep, calculating, survival mode fear. The kind that makes your blood run cold before your brain even catches up. I blinked at him, confused. "What?" I mouthed silently. He didn't respond. He just gave me the faintest shake of his head and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he took a step back, his hand brushing against mine so lightly that no one else in the crowded kitchen would notice. It was our childhood signal, the one we used when we needed to escape family drama without causing a scene. I had no idea why he was using it now. All around us, relatives were laughing, eating cake, and clapping along as Aunt Patricia gave her over-the-top speech about how wonderful Uncle Ben looked for 70. Balloons bobbed from every surface. Music drifted in from the backyard speakers, and Uncle Ben sat in his favorite leather recliner, smiling quietly like a king watching his court celebrate. I should have been happy. I wanted to be happy. But Marcus's whisper still echoed in my ears. "Don't ask questions." Something was very, very wrong. If you're just as confused as I was in that moment, don't worry. Everything's about to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. Stick with me and make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story has more twists than you can handle, and you won't want to miss what happens next when a simple family barbecue turned into the most terrifying and justice-filled day of my life. But before I tell you about that moment that changed everything, you need to understand who these people are and why what happened was so shocking. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a graphic designer in Tucson, Arizona, living a pretty quiet life in a small apartment with my boyfriend Jake and our rescue dog Luna. I'm the kind of person who minds her own business, pays her bills on time, and tries to stay out of family drama whenever possible. And trust me, in my family, there's always drama. Uncle Ben isn't actually my uncle by blood. He's my dad's older brother, but he's been more of a father figure to me than my actual dad ever was. Ben never had kids of his own, and when his wife Maria passed away from cancer 2 years ago, he threw himself into being the family patriarch. At 70 years old, he was still sharp as a tack, still running his successful contracting business that he'd built from nothing over 40 years. Ben owned a beautiful house in one of Phoenix's nicest neighborhoods, drove a pristine vintage Mustang, and had enough money in the bank to retire comfortably 10 times over. He was generous to a fault, always helping family members with loans they never had to pay back, college tuition for the younger cousins, and surprise gifts that showed up exactly when you needed them most. 5. Marcus is Uncle Ben's nephew through his late wife Maria's side of the family. He's 31, works as a computer programmer for a tech company in Phoenix, and has always been my closest ally in our chaotic extended family. Marcus is the kind of guy who notices everything but says very little. He's got this quiet intelligence that most people underestimate until they need his help solving a problem. We grew up spending summers at Ben and Maria's house, building forts in the backyard and staying up late playing video games while the adults argued about money and old grudges. Marcus taught me how to think critically, how to question things that didn't make sense, and how to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Then there's Aunt Patricia. Patricia isn't Ben's sister by blood either. She was married to Ben's younger brother Carlos before he died in a motorcycle accident 15 years ago. Patricia never remarried, and she never let anyone forget how hard her life had been since becoming a widow. She's 53 years old, works part-time at a dental office, and lives in a cramped apartment with her 29-year-old son Derek, who's never managed to hold down a steady job for more than 6 months. Patricia has always been bitter about Ben's success, constantly making passive-aggressive comments about how easy his life was compared to hers, how he never had to struggle as a single parent, how he didn't appreciate what he had. Derek, Patricia's son, is a whole different kind of problem. He's the type of guy who always has a get-rich-quick scheme, always owes someone money, and always has an excuse for why nothing is ever his fault. Derek has bounced between construction jobs, tried selling insurance, attempted to start 3 different businesses that failed within months, and has been arrested twice for bar fights. He's charming when he wants something from you, But there's always been something unsettling about the way he looks at people, like he's calculating what they're worth to him. Uncle Ben had helped Derek out financially more times than anyone could count, paying for his legal fees, covering his rent, and even buying him a used truck that Derek promptly crashed and never offered to pay back. The family dynamics had been tense for years. Patricia resented Ben's wealth and generosity because it highlighted her own financial struggles. Derek resented Ben's lectures about responsibility and finding stable work. And honestly, most of us had gotten tired of the constant drama, which is why family gatherings had become rare over the past few years. After Maria's funeral, the tension got even worse because Patricia seemed to think she deserved some kind of inheritance or ongoing financial support as Carlos's widow, even though Carlos and Ben had never been particularly close. That's why I was so surprised when Patricia called me 3 weeks before Ben's 70th birthday, her voice unusually sweet and conciliatory, talking about family healing and second chances. She said Ben had specifically asked for me to be there, that he'd been feeling lonely since Maria's death, and wanted to reconnect with the family members who truly cared about him. It sounded nice, but it also sounded completely unlike the Patricia I'd known for years. The Patricia who complained about Ben at every family gathering and made snide comments about his money. But I couldn't ignore a direct request from Uncle Ben, especially if he was struggling with loneliness. So I said yes, not knowing I was walking straight into the most terrifying situation of my life. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in late September. I was sitting on my couch, editing a logo design for a local bakery, when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. Patricia Rodriguez. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to let it go to voicemail. Patricia never called unless she wanted something, and our last conversation had ended with her hanging up on me after I refused to lend Derek money for another one of his failed business ventures. But curiosity got the better of me, so I answered, "Hi, Patricia." "Elena, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with a honey-sweet tone I'd never heard from her before. "How are you, dear? It's been far too long." I was immediately on guard. Patricia had never called me sweetheart in my entire life. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "What's going on?" She let out a little laugh that sounded practiced, artificial. "Well, I'm calling because Ben's 70th birthday is coming up in a few weeks, and we're planning something really special for him. A proper family celebration, you know? Something to help heal some of the old wounds and bring everyone back together." I frowned. Patricia talking about healing family wounds was like hearing a shark discuss vegetarianism. 5. "That sounds nice," I said, still waiting for the catch. "And Ben specifically asked for you to be there, Elena. He said he's been thinking about you a lot since Maria passed, and he really wants to reconnect with the family members who genuinely care about him. You know how lonely he's been." That part actually did sound like something Uncle Ben might say. He'd been calling me more often since Maria's funeral, just to check in and chat about work or ask about Jake. Those conversations were some of the bright spots in my weeks, hearing his warm laugh and his stories about the old days. If he really wanted me there, I couldn't say no. "When and where?" I asked. "October 15th, at his house in Phoenix. We're planning a surprise party in his backyard, nothing too fancy, just family and close friends. Derek's been helping me organize everything, and we've invited everyone from the old crowd. It'll be just like the parties we used to have before things got complicated." The mention of Derek helping organize anything made my stomach turn slightly. Derek's idea of organization usually involved other people doing the work while he took credit for it. But again, if this was what Uncle Ben wanted, I'd figure out a way to make it work. "I'll need to take Friday off work to drive up there," I said. "That's fine, right?" "Of course, dear. And please, bring Jake if he wants to come. We'd love to meet him properly." This was getting stranger by the minute. Patricia had met Jake exactly once, at Maria's funeral, and had barely acknowledged his existence. Now she was extending warm invitations like we were her favorite relatives. "I'll talk to him and let you know," I said. "Patricia, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart. This is really sweet of you to organize, but it seems like a big change from, well, how things have been between our families lately. What made you want to do this now?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to feel uncomfortable. "Elena, I know I haven't always been the easiest person to get along with. Losing Carlos was hard, and I think I let that bitterness affect how I treated people who didn't deserve it. But watching Ben struggle with loneliness after Maria's death made me realize how precious family really is. Life's too short to hold grudges, don't you think? We need to take care of each other while we still can. It sounded like something she'd practiced saying, but the sentiment was nice enough. And if Patricia was genuinely trying to make amends and help Uncle Ben feel less alone, maybe I was being too cynical. "You're right," I said. "Family is important. I'll be there, and I'll try to convince Jake to come with me." "Wonderful. Oh, and Elena? Let's keep this between us for now. We want it to be a complete surprise for Ben, so don't mention anything to him if he calls you. We're telling everyone the same thing, of course. Should I bring anything? A gift or food or—" "Just yourself, dear. Derek and I have everything handled. Just show up, ready to celebrate." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for several minutes. Something about the entire conversation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me. 5. When Jake got home from work an hour later, I told him about Patricia's call and the party invitation. He listened with raised eyebrows, occasionally shaking his head. "Your aunt who hates your uncle is throwing him a surprise party?" he asked. "The same aunt who spent Maria's funeral complaining about how Ben never appreciated what he had?" "I know it sounds weird," I said. "But maybe she's really trying to change. And if Uncle Ben is lonely and wants family around him, I can't say no to that." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Elena, you know I'll support whatever you decide, but this feels like a setup to me. People like Patricia don't just suddenly become generous and family-oriented. There's always an angle." I knew he was probably right, but I also knew I'd regret it forever if I missed Uncle Ben's 70th birthday because I was too suspicious of Patricia's motives. "Let's just go and see what happens," I said. "What's the worst that could happen at a family barbecue?" Looking back now, that might have been the most naive question I've ever asked. The drive from Tucson to Phoenix took exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes, and I spent most of it trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had been growing in my stomach since we left home. Jake drove while I stared out the window at the desert landscape, watching saguaro cacti blur past as we headed north on Interstate 10. We'd left early Friday morning so we could check into our hotel and maybe grab lunch with Uncle Ben before the surprise party that evening. I'd booked us a room at a modest hotel about 15 minutes from Ben's neighborhood, partly because I wanted an easy escape route if the family drama got too intense, and partly because Jake had insisted we needed our own space. 5. Uncle Ben lived in Ahwatukee, one of Phoenix's most expensive suburbs, in a beautiful 2-story house he and Maria had bought 20 years earlier when his contracting business really took off. The neighborhood was the kind of place where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine, where the houses were spaced far enough apart for privacy but close enough to feel like a real community. Ben's house sat on nearly an acre of perfectly landscaped desert plants and mature palm trees, with a circular driveway and a 3-car garage that housed his vintage Mustang, his work truck, and Maria's old Honda that he couldn't bring himself to sell. When we pulled into the driveway at 2:30 that afternoon, I immediately noticed that something felt different about the place. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered it, painted desert beige with dark brown trim and red tile roof, but there was a strange energy in the air. Maybe it was just my nerves, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't been back here since Maria's funeral 2 years ago. Jake parked behind Ben's Mustang and squeezed my hand. "You ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. Uncle Ben answered the door before we could even knock, like he'd been watching for us through the front window. He looked older than I remembered, a little thinner in the face, his thick gray hair slightly longer and less perfectly styled than usual. But his smile was genuine and warm as he pulled me into one of his famous bear hugs that lifted me off my feet. "Elena, you look beautiful, mija. And Jake, good to see you again." He shook Jake's hand firmly and gestured us inside. Come in. I was just making some iced tea. You must be tired from the drive." The interior of the house was exactly as I remembered it, decorated in Maria's southwestern style with warm earth tones, Native American artwork, and comfortable leather furniture that invited you to sink in and stay a while. But as we walked through the living room toward the kitchen, I noticed small changes that made my heart ache. Maria's reading glasses were gone from the side table where she used to leave them. Her favorite throw blanket was no longer draped over the back of her chair. The coffee table that used to be cluttered with her magazines and crossword puzzle books was now bare except for a single remote control. The place looks great, Uncle Ben, I said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless meals over the years. Thanks, sweetheart. I've been trying to keep it up the way Maria would have wanted. Some days are easier than others, you know? He moved around the kitchen with less energy than I remembered, his movements slower and more deliberate. When he reached up to get glasses from the cabinet, I noticed his hand shake slightly. Are you feeling okay? I asked. You seem a little tired. Ben waved off my concern with a smile. Just getting old, mija. 70 years will do that to a man. Plus, I haven't been sleeping great lately. Sometimes this big house feels too quiet, you know? Jake leaned forward in his chair. Have you thought about getting a dog or cat? Sometimes having another living thing in the house helps with the loneliness. Maria always wanted a dog, Ben said wistfully, but we traveled so much for work, it never seemed fair to the animal. Maybe now that I'm slowing down, it's something to consider. We chatted for about an hour, catching up on work and life and sharing memories of Maria. Ben seemed like himself, just sadder and more tired than usual, which made perfect sense given everything he'd been through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off about him, like he was working harder than usual to seem normal. Around 4 o'clock, Ben glanced at the kitchen clock and stood up from the table. I should probably start getting cleaned up. Patricia said people might start arriving around 6 for this little get-together she's planning. I still can't believe she's going to all this trouble for my birthday. You didn't suspect anything? Jake asked. Not a clue. Patricia called me yesterday and said she wanted to have a few people over for cake. Nothing fancy. I told her she didn't need to fuss, but you know how she is when she gets an idea in her head. I exchanged a quick glance with Jake. The story Patricia had told me was that this was supposed to be a surprise party, but she'd clearly told Ben about it ahead of time. That was the first small crack in what I'd thought was a straightforward family celebration, but I brushed it off as a miscommunication. After all, surprise parties were hard to coordinate, and maybe Patricia had decided it was easier to just tell Ben directly. 5. By 6:15 that evening, Uncle Ben's backyard had been transformed into what looked like a picture-perfect birthday celebration. Patricia and Derek had strung white lights between the mesquite trees, set up several round tables with cheerful tablecloths, and arranged enough folding chairs to seat at least 40 people. A long buffet table groaned under the weight of covered dishes, and an impressive 3-layer chocolate cake sat prominently on its own dedicated table with Happy 70th Birthday Ben written in elegant blue frosting. Mariachi music played softly from speakers hidden among the landscaping, and the whole scene looked like something out of a party planning magazine. But as Jake and I mingled with the growing crowd of guests, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit the warm family reunion atmosphere Patricia had described on the phone. First, there were way more people than I'd expected for an intimate family gathering. I recognized maybe half the faces from previous family events, distant cousins, and old family friends who I hadn't seen in years. But scattered throughout the crowd were at least a dozen people I'd never seen before in my life. They weren't mingling much with the family members, instead standing in small clusters near the edges of the yard, nursing drinks and observing rather than participating. Uncle Ben was holding court in the center of the patio, surrounded by well-wishers and accepting birthday greetings with his usual gracious smile. But something about his demeanor was bothering me. He seemed to be working harder than usual to follow conversations, pausing a beat too long before responding to questions, and occasionally looking confused when people brought up shared memories that should have been crystal clear to him. At one point, I watched him greet my cousin Sophia, who he'd known since she was a baby, and call her Sandra. Sophia corrected him gently, but I saw the flash of concern in her eyes. Elena. Patricia's voice rang out across the patio as she approached with her arms outstretched, wearing a flowing turquoise dress that was far more elegant than anything I'd ever seen her wear to a family event. You made it. And Jake, you look so handsome. I'm so glad you both could be here. She air-kissed both of us, and then stepped back with a beaming smile that seemed just a little too bright, too practiced. Isn't this wonderful? Look how happy Ben is. I think this is exactly what he needed. I glanced over at Uncle Ben, who was now sitting heavily in a patio chair while Derek crouched beside him, speaking in low, urgent tones. Patricia, this is really impressive, I said, gesturing at the elaborate decorations. You must have spent weeks planning all this. Oh, it was nothing, she said with a wave of her hand. Derek did most of the heavy lifting. He's been such a help with everything lately. I don't know what I would have done without him. That struck me as odd. considering Derek's track record of avoiding responsibility whenever possible. Where did all these people come from? Jake asked, nodding toward a group of unfamiliar faces near the pool area. I don't think I've met half the guests here. Patricia's smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. Oh, you know how it is. Word gets out about a party, and suddenly everyone wants to celebrate. Some are neighbors, some are friends from Ben's work. The important thing is that everyone's here to show Ben how much he's loved. I watched as one of the mystery guests, a middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt, approached Uncle Ben with what looked like a clipboard partially hidden behind his back. The man shook Ben's hand and began talking animatedly, gesturing toward the house. Ben nodded along, but his expression was blank, like he was trying to follow a conversation that was just slightly too fast or complex for him to process. Who's that talking to, Uncle Ben? I asked Patricia. Oh, that's Mr. Henderson from the Homeowners Association, she said quickly. Something about the landscaping permits. Nothing important. You know how these neighborhood associations can be about paperwork. But as I watched the interaction, Mr. Henderson pulled out his clipboard and seemed to be asking Ben to sign something. Uncle Ben took the pen with a slightly shaky hand and scrawled his signature without really looking at the document. Jake caught my eye and tilted his head toward the house. I'm going to grab a drink from inside, he said. Elena, you want anything? I knew that was code for, I'm going to look around and see what else seems off about this situation. Just a water, I said. Take your time. As Jake headed toward the house, I noticed Marcus emerging from the crowd, a plate of untouched food in his hand and a troubled expression on his face. He made his way over to where I was standing and gave me a quick hug. Hey cousin, he said, having fun at this celebration? The way he said celebration made it sound like he was questioning whether that's really what this was. 5. It's certainly elaborate, I said carefully. Patricia and Derek really went all out. Marcus glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Elena, I need to talk to you privately. There are some things about this party that don't make sense, and I think Uncle Ben might be in some kind of trouble. Before I could respond, Derek appeared beside us with 2 glasses of what looked like punch. Marcus, Elena, you two look like you're having serious conversation. This is a party. No serious faces allowed. He handed us the glasses with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Drink up and enjoy yourselves. We're all family here. I took the glass from Derek but didn't drink, watching as he walked away toward another group of guests with that same forced enthusiasm. Marcus waited until Derek was out of earshot, then set his own untouched glass down on a nearby table. We need to find somewhere private to talk, he said quietly. Give me 15 minutes, then meet me in Ben's study. Tell anyone who asks that you're looking for the bathroom. He melted back into the crowd before I could ask any questions, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of dread. I spent the next few minutes trying to act normal, making small talk with relatives and accepting compliments on how good I looked, but my mind was racing. Marcus wasn't the type to be paranoid or dramatic. If he thought something was wrong, there was probably something wrong. When I couldn't stand the suspense any longer, I made my way into the house through the sliding glass door, telling Patricia I needed to use the restroom and freshen up. 5. Uncle Ben's study was on the first floor, just off the main hallway, and it had always been his private sanctuary. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with construction manuals, business journals, and Maria's romance novels that he'd never had the heart to pack away. His massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, covered with neat stacks of papers and his old-fashioned banker's lamp. I found Marcus crouched behind the desk, examining something near the wall with the flashlight on his phone. What are you looking at? I whispered, closing the door behind me. This, he said, pointing to a small black device about the size of a quarter that was attached to the underside of Ben's desk. And this. He showed me another identical device stuck to the back of a picture frame, and probably a dozen more hidden around this room. My blood ran cold. Are those cameras? Audio recording devices? Marcus said grimly. Professional grade, not some cheap spy store junk. Someone's been monitoring every conversation that happens in this room, probably for weeks or months. Who would do something like that? I asked, though I was already afraid I knew the answer. Think about it, Elena. Who has access to this house? Who knows Ben's routines? Who would benefit from having recordings of his private conversations? Marcus stood up and moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the party outside. I found more devices in the living room and kitchen. This isn't some random break-in, this is systematic surveillance. I sank into one of the leather chairs, trying to process what this meant. Marcus, if someone's been recording Uncle Ben's conversations, what are they looking for? Evidence that he's mentally incompetent would be my guess. Think about it. If you wanted to prove someone wasn't capable of making their own decisions anymore, having recordings of them being confused or disoriented would be pretty valuable evidence. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think Patricia and Derek are behind this? Marcus nodded slowly. I overheard Derek on the phone earlier, before the party started. He was talking to someone about documentation and medical evaluation, and something about the timeline moving faster than expected. At the time, I thought maybe he was talking about party planning, but now. He trailed off, shaking his head. There's more, Elena. I went into Ben's bathroom to splash some water on my face, and I checked his medicine cabinet out of curiosity. You know how he's always been about taking his heart medication and his sleep aids on schedule? Yeah, Maria used to set timers to remind him. Well, his medicine cabinet is full of bottles I don't recognize. Unmarked pill bottles, some with what looks like crushed residue on the caps, and his regular prescriptions are nowhere to be found. My stomach lurched. You think they're drugging him? I think they're keeping him just disoriented enough to seem like he's developing dementia or some other cognitive issue, but not so out of it that people get immediately suspicious. Just confused enough to make mistakes, to seem forgetful, to appear like he might need someone else to start making decisions for him. 5. I thought about how Uncle Ben had seemed at the party, the delayed responses, the confusion with names, the way he'd signed that document without really reading it. Oh my God, Marcus. We have to do something. We will, he said firmly. But first, I need to get more evidence. Can you keep an eye on Ben while I do some more investigating? Don't let him sign anything else, and try to keep him away from Derek and Patricia, if possible. What kind of evidence are you looking for? Financial documents, medical records, anything that shows what they're really planning, because I guarantee you, this party isn't about celebrating Ben's birthday. This is about setting up some kind of legal framework to take control of his life. After Marcus left to continue his investigation, I made my way back to the party, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the panic building in my chest. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the yard, and the white lights Patricia had strung between the trees were beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Now it felt sinister, like a stage set designed to hide something terrible. I found Uncle Ben sitting at one of the round tables, looking exhausted despite the early hour. A plate of untouched food sat in front of him, and he was staring blankly at the crowd of people celebrating around him. When I approached, he looked up and smiled, but it took him a moment to focus on my face. Elena, sweetheart, are you enjoying the party? His words were slightly slurred, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice unless they were specifically listening for it. 5. It's lovely, Uncle Ben. Patricia really outdid herself. I sat down in the chair next to him and studied his face more carefully. His pupils were dilated, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that hadn't been there earlier in the afternoon when we'd had iced tea in his kitchen. Are you feeling okay? You seem tired. Just a little dizzy, he said, rubbing his forehead. I think I might have had too much sun today. Derek brought me some aspirin earlier, said it would help with the headache. My heart skipped. What kind of aspirin? Just regular aspirin, I think. He said Patricia had picked it up at the pharmacy for me since I was running low on my usual medications. Ben's voice was getting softer, like talking was becoming an effort. She's been so thoughtful lately, taking care of all my prescription refills and doctor appointments. I don't know what I'd do without family looking out for me. The way he said it made me realize that Patricia had been positioning herself as his caretaker for weeks or possibly months, slowly inserting herself into his medical care routine. Uncle Ben, I need to use your bathroom upstairs. The downstairs one seems to be occupied. Is that okay? Of course, mija. You know where everything is. I squeezed his shoulder gently and headed into the house, but instead of going upstairs, I slipped into the downstairs bathroom that Marcus had mentioned. I locked the door behind me and immediately opened the medicine cabinet above the sink. What I found made my hands shake. The cabinet was indeed full of pill bottles, but none of them had proper pharmacy labels. Instead, they were marked with handwritten labels in what looked like Derek's messy scrawl. sleep aid, 1 at bedtime. Pain relief as needed, vitamins, 2 with breakfast. But when I opened the bottles and examined the contents, none of the pills looked like anything I recognized. The sleep aid bottle contained small white tablets that were unmarked and looked nothing like the standard sleep medication my own doctor had prescribed for me years ago. More disturbing was what wasn't there. Uncle Ben's regular prescriptions for his heart condition, his blood pressure medication, and his legitimate sleep aids were completely missing. I knew he'd been taking the same medications for years because Maria used to worry constantly about him forgetting to take them on schedule. Those prescriptions should have been front and center in his medicine cabinet, but they were nowhere to be found. I used my phone to take quick photos of the unmarked bottles, making sure to capture the handwritten labels and the pills themselves. As I was putting the last bottle back, I noticed something else that made my stomach turn. There was a small mortar and pestle set on the counter next to the sink, the kind used for crushing pills. White residue coated the inside of both pieces, and when I looked closer, I could see similar residue on the rim of a water glass sitting nearby. Someone had been crushing pills and mixing them into Uncle Ben's drinks. The evidence was right there in plain sight, hidden in the one place most party guests would never think to look. I took photos of the mortar and pestle, the residue, and everything else that seemed suspicious. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. When I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, I quickly closed the medicine cabinet and flushed the toilet to make it sound like I'd actually been using the bathroom. As I opened the bathroom door, I nearly collided with Derek, who was standing in the hallway with a concerned expression on his face. "Elena, there you are. I was looking for you. Some of the guests were asking about you." His eyes flicked past me toward the bathroom. "Everything okay in there?" "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just needed a minute to touch up my makeup," Derek nodded, but I could see him scanning my face, looking for signs of suspicion or discovery. "Well, you'd better get back outside. We're about to cut the cake, and Ben's been asking for you." I followed Derek back outside, my mind racing with everything I'd discovered in the bathroom. The medicine cabinet, the surveillance equipment Marcus had found, Uncle Ben's deteriorating condition throughout the evening. It was all starting to form a horrifying picture. But I needed to find Marcus and share what I'd learned before we could figure out our next move. Derek stayed close to me as we walked back onto the patio, his hand resting lightly on my lower back in a gesture that probably looked friendly to observers but felt controlling and invasive. The cake-cutting ceremony was already underway when we rejoined the party. Uncle Ben was standing behind the elaborate 3-layer cake, holding a large knife with Patricia's help as she guided his hands. "Make a wish, Ben," someone called out, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. But I could see that Ben was struggling to stay upright, swaying slightly as Patricia's grip on his hands tightened. His smile looked forced and confused, like he wasn't entirely sure why everyone was staring at him. "Speech! Speech!" Derek called out, and other guests picked up the chant. Patricia beamed and stepped back, gesturing for Ben to address the crowd. Ben cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom he probably didn't even recognize. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "It means so much to have family and friends here to celebrate with me. I'm grateful for everyone who's been taking care of me lately, especially Patricia and Derek, who've been so helpful with everything I can't seem to manage on my own anymore." The way he phrased that last part sent chills down my spine. It sounded like something someone had coached him to say, a public acknowledgement of his supposed inability to care for himself. I noticed several of the unfamiliar guests were holding up their phones, recording Ben's speech, and a few were taking notes on small pads they'd pulled from their pockets. This wasn't just a family celebration, it was a performance, carefully orchestrated to create evidence of Ben's decline. After the cake was distributed, I finally spotted Marcus near the back fence, deep in conversation with Jake. They both looked grim, and I could tell from their body language that Marcus had shared his discoveries with my boyfriend. I made my way over to them, dodging relatives and strangers who tried to pull me into conversations about how wonderful the party was and how much Ben seemed to be enjoying himself. 5. "Elena," Marcus said quietly when I reached them. "Jake told me you found some things in the bathroom." "Unmarked pill bottles, crushing equipment, and no sign of his real medications," I whispered back. "Marcus, they're systematically drugging him. And from what he said in his speech, they've been conditioning him to publicly acknowledge that he can't take care of himself anymore." Jake's jaw tightened. Marcus showed me photos of financial documents he found in the garage. This goes way deeper than we thought. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos he'd taken while I was inside. I found these hidden in a filing cabinet in the garage, underneath some old tax returns. Look at this first one. The photo showed a legal document titled Petition for Conservatorship, with Uncle Ben's name listed as the proposed conservatee and Patricia Rodriguez listed as the proposed conservator. The document was dated 3 days ago and appeared to already have been filed with the county court. They're trying to get legal control over all his affairs. I breathed. Look at the next photo. Marcus swiped to show me a medical evaluation form, supposedly completed by someone named Dr. Harrison Michaels, documenting severe cognitive decline, memory loss, and inability to manage financial affairs. The evaluation was dated just 1 week ago, but I'd never heard Uncle Ben mention seeing any new doctors. I looked up this Dr. Michaels. Marcus continued. His medical license was revoked 2 years ago for falsifying patient records. Jake leaned in closer. There's more. Show her the bank statements. The next series of photos made my stomach drop. They showed Uncle Ben's checking and savings accounts, with regular withdrawals over the past 3 months totaling nearly $50,000. The withdrawal slips were all signed with Ben's signature, but the handwriting looked shaky and uncertain, nothing like the confident signature I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas gifts over the years. They've been stealing from him while they drug him and document his supposed incompetence, I said, feeling sick. And tonight's party is what, the final piece of evidence they need? I think so, Marcus said grimly. All these mysterious guests with their phones and notebooks, I'm betting they're witnesses. Patricia and Derek have lined up to testify about Ben's condition. People who can say they saw him confused, disoriented, unable to recognize family members or carry on coherent conversations. I looked back toward the patio where Uncle Ben was now sitting alone at a table, his head drooping forward like he was fighting to stay awake. Patricia was nearby, chatting animatedly with a group of the unfamiliar guests, occasionally gesturing toward Ben with what looked like practiced concern. How long do you think they've been planning this? I asked. Months, probably, Marcus said. Maybe since right after Maria's funeral, when Ben was most vulnerable and grief-stricken. Patricia probably saw an opportunity and started positioning herself as his helpful caretaker, slowly isolating him from other family members and medical professionals who might notice what was really happening. 05. Jake was staring at his phone, scrolling through something with a focused expression. I've been researching conservatorship fraud while you two were investigating. If Patricia gets legal control over Ben's affairs, she'll have access to everything: his bank accounts, his house, his business assets, even his medical decisions. And once someone is declared incompetent, it's incredibly difficult to reverse the process, even if they recover. I knew we needed to act fast, but first I had to confirm what we suspected about Uncle Ben's condition. I'm going to go talk to him, I told Marcus and Jake. Try to get him alone and see if I can get him to tell me what's really been happening. Marcus nodded grimly. Be careful. If Patricia or Derek see you having a serious conversation with him, they might try to interfere. Jake squeezed my hand. We'll keep watch and create a distraction if you need one. I made my way back across the patio to where Uncle Ben was sitting. Most of the other guests had moved toward the buffet table for seconds on cake, leaving him relatively isolated. As I approached, I could see that his condition had deteriorated even more in the short time I'd been talking with Marcus. His eyelids were heavy, and he was gripping the edge of the table like he needed it for support. Uncle Ben, I said softly, pulling up a chair next to him. How are you feeling? He turned toward me slowly, and it took him a moment to focus on my face. Elena? I'm glad you're here, sweetheart. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing my mind. The way he said it, with such raw vulnerability, broke my heart. What do you mean? I asked gently. I keep forgetting things, simple things, like what day it is or what I had for breakfast. And I feel tired all the time, even when I've slept for 10 hours. Patricia says it's normal for someone my age, but it doesn't feel normal. I glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer to him. Uncle Ben, can you tell me about your medications? Have they changed recently? His brow furrowed as he tried to concentrate. Patricia's been helping me with all that. She says my old doctor wasn't managing my prescriptions properly, so she found me a new one. Dr. Michaels, I think? He's been adjusting my medications to help with the memory problems. My heart sank. The fake Dr. Marcus had looked up. Have you actually met with Dr. Michaels in person? Ben looked confused by the question. I think so. Patricia handles most of my appointments now. She says it's better that way because I get confused about the scheduling. He paused, rubbing his temples. Elena, can I tell you something? Sometimes I feel like there are conversations happening around me that I can't quite follow. Like people are making decisions about my life, but when I try to pay attention, my thoughts get all fuzzy. That confirmed what we'd suspected about the drugging. Uncle Ben, when did you start feeling this way? Can you remember? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling to organize his thoughts. It started maybe 3 months ago, right around the time Patricia began helping out more around the house. At first, I was grateful for the help. After Maria died, everything felt so overwhelming. But now, he trailed off, looking lost. Now what? I prompted gently. Now I feel like I'm disappearing, he whispered, like I'm becoming invisible in my own life. Patricia makes all my meals, manages my medications, handles my bank accounts, schedules my appointments. She says it's because I'm not capable anymore, and maybe she's right. Maybe I really am losing my mind. Tears welled up in his eyes, and I had to fight back my own. I reached over and took his hand, noticing again how much thinner he'd gotten since I'd last seen him. Uncle Ben, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I don't think you're losing your mind. I think someone has been giving you medications that aren't prescribed for you. Medications that are making you confused and tired. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I could see a flash of the sharp, intelligent man I'd always known. You think Patricia is drugging me? He asked, his voice barely audible. I think Patricia and Derek are trying to make you seem incompetent so they can take control of your finances and property. And I think they've been planning this for months. Ben stared at me for several seconds, processing this information. Then he rolled up his sleeve and showed me his forearm. There were several small puncture marks near his elbow, partially healed but still visible. Patricia said these were from blood tests for my new doctor, he said quietly. But I don't remember getting any blood drawn. I just wake up sometimes with these marks and band-aids that I don't remember getting. The injection sites explained how they'd been administering stronger drugs without him being fully aware of it. Uncle Ben, we're going to get you help, I said firmly. But right now, I need you to not eat or drink anything else at this party. Can you do that for me? He nodded slowly, and I could see that despite the drugs in his system, he was beginning to understand the gravity of his situation. As I sat with Uncle Ben, trying to keep him alert and focused, I saw Marcus approaching us with a deliberate casualness that I recognized from our childhood. He was putting on his everything is normal act, which meant he'd discovered something urgent and needed to communicate without drawing attention. Jake was right behind him, carrying 2 bottles of water and wearing the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, you two, Marcus said cheerfully, though I could see the tension in his jaw. Mind if we join you for a minute? I wanted to ask Uncle Ben about that vintage Mustang of his. It was a perfect cover. Marcus had always been genuinely interested in Ben's car, so the conversation would seem natural to anyone watching. Jake handed me one of the water bottles and sat down across from us, positioning himself so he could keep an eye on the rest of the party. Actually, Uncle Ben, Marcus continued, lowering his voice slightly, I was wondering if you might want to show Elena and Jake the car. I know Jake's never gotten a proper look at it, and the lighting's better in the garage than it was this afternoon, I understood immediately. Marcus had found something in the garage that he needed to show us, and getting Ben away from the party crowd was crucial for his safety and our planning. 5. Ben nodded slowly, though I could see him struggling to follow the conversation. Of course, I love showing off that car. Maria always said I spent more time polishing it than talking to her. He chuckled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before his wife's death. As we started to stand up, I noticed Patricia glancing our way from across the patio, her expression shifting from hostess smile to something more alert and concerned. Where are you all going? Derek's voice cut through the evening air as he approached our table, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Uncle Ben was just going to show us his Mustang, I said, forcing a casual tone. Jake's been wanting to see it up close. Derek's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Oh, that's great. I'll come with you. I love looking at that car too. Marcus shot me a quick look that said this was not part of the plan. Actually, Jake said smoothly, I was hoping to get some one-on-one time with Ben. You know how it is. I want to make a good impression on Elena's family. And talking cars is always a safe bet with the older generation. He grinned at Derek in a way that suggested masculine bonding rather than suspicious behavior. Derek hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to supervise our interaction with Ben and not wanting to appear overly controlling. "Sure, no problem," Derek said finally. "Just don't keep him out there too long. He gets tired easily these days, and we've still got more cake to serve." The casual way he mentioned Ben's fatigue, as if it were a well-established fact rather than a recent development, made my skin crawl. "Of course," Marcus said. "Just a quick look, then we'll bring him right back." We helped Uncle Ben to his feet and began walking slowly toward the garage, which was accessible through a side gate in the backyard fence. I could feel Patricia and Derek watching us from across the patio, but they were trapped by their host duties and couldn't follow without making it obvious they were monitoring Ben's movements. The sun had fully set now, and the backyard lights cast long shadows that provided some cover for our movement. Once we reached the garage, Marcus quickly opened the side door and ushered us inside, flipping on the overhead light. Uncle Ben's pristine 1967 Mustang convertible sat in the center of the space, its red paint gleaming under the fluorescent bulbs. But Marcus wasn't interested in the car. He immediately went to a workbench along the far wall and grabbed a manila folder that had been hidden behind some paint cans. "I found this while you were talking to Ben," he said urgently, opening the folder to reveal more documents. "It's a complete timeline of their plan." The papers inside detailed a systematic approach to gaining control over Ben's affairs, starting with Patricia inserting herself as his caretaker immediately after Maria's funeral. There were notes about gradually increasing his medication to create confusion, scheduling fake medical appointments to document cognitive decline, and slowly isolating him from family members who might notice the changes. But the most chilling document was a handwritten note in Derek's messy scrawl. Phase 3, party documentation complete. Medical evaluations filed. Conservatorship hearing scheduled for Monday 10/18. Transfer of assets to begin immediately after legal approval. Estimated timeline for full control, 2-3 weeks. Today was Friday, October 15th. The hearing was in just 3 days. "They're moving fast," Jake said grimly. "If that hearing goes forward Monday, Ben could lose control of everything by the end of next week." I looked at Uncle Ben, who was leaning heavily against the workbench, trying to process what we were telling him. Despite the drugs in his system, I could see the fear and anger building in his eyes as he began to understand how thoroughly he'd been betrayed by people he'd trusted. "We need to get him out of here," I said, "tonight, before they realize we know what's happening." Marcus nodded. "I've been thinking about that. We can't just drive away. They'll notice immediately and might try to stop us. We need a distraction." Marcus was already formulating a plan as he spoke. "I'm going to go back to the party and tell everyone I'm feeling sick. Food poisoning from something I ate earlier today, before I got here. That way it's not Patricia's food, and she won't take offense. I'll make a big scene, double over, ask for help getting to my car. That should draw everyone's attention and give you 3 a window to slip out." Jake nodded, understanding immediately. "We'll take Ben through the front of the house, while everyone's focused on you in the backyard." "But what about our cars?" I asked. "They're parked in the driveway where everyone can see them." "Leave them," Marcus said firmly. "We'll take Ben's Mustang. It's already in the garage, and we can pull out through the alley behind his house. Patricia and Derek won't think to check if his car is missing until much later, and by then we'll be long gone." Uncle Ben fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his car keys with shaking hands. "Take them," he said quietly. "I don't think I should be driving right now anyway." The plan was risky, but it was better than anything else we could come up with on short notice. Marcus checked his watch. "Give me 5 minutes to get back to the party and start the performance. Then move quickly but don't run. If anyone sees you leaving through the front door, just say Ben wasn't feeling well and needed to lie down." He squeezed my shoulder. "Elena, you drive. Jake, you help Ben. I'll meet you at that 24-hour diner on Indian School Road, the one near the freeway on-ramp. We can regroup there and figure out our next move." Marcus slipped out of the garage and disappeared into the darkness of the backyard. Through the small garage window, I could see the glow of the party lights and hear the distant sound of conversation and laughter. It felt surreal that people were still celebrating while we were uncovering this nightmare. Uncle Ben was leaning against Jake, looking exhausted but more alert than he'd been all evening, like the adrenaline of understanding his situation was helping him fight through the drugs. "Elena," he said softly, "I need you to know something. There's a safe in my bedroom closet behind the shoe rack. The combination is Maria's birthday, 081253. Inside, there are copies of my real will, my legitimate medical records, and documentation of all my accounts before Patricia started making changes. If something happens to me tonight, make sure those documents get to the police." I memorized the combination, my heart racing at the implication that Uncle Ben thought he might not survive this. Suddenly, we heard Marcus's voice from the backyard, loud and distressed. "Oh God, I think I'm going to be sick. Patricia, I'm so sorry, but I think I have food poisoning from lunch earlier. It's hitting me really hard." Perfect timing and perfect acting. We could hear the immediate response from the party guests, chairs scraping, concerned voices, footsteps moving toward Marcus's location. "Now," Jake whispered. He opened the garage door that led into the house, and we quickly made our way through Ben's kitchen, down the hallway, and toward the front door. The house felt eerily quiet compared to the commotion in the backyard. I could hear Patricia's voice through the sliding glass door, all concern and sympathy, as she helped Marcus with his emergency. Derek's voice was there too, asking if he should call 911 or drive Marcus to a hospital. We reached the front door without incident, but just as Jake was turning the deadbolt, we heard footsteps on the hardwood floor behind us. "Where are you going?" It was one of the mystery guests, a thin man in his 50s wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. He was holding a clipboard and looking at us with suspicious eyes. "Ben wasn't feeling well," I said as calmly as I could manage. "We're just helping him get some rest." The man stepped closer, and I noticed he had a small recording device clipped to his shirt pocket. "I think he should stay at the party. There are still people who want to talk to him, get some statements about how he's been feeling lately." It was clear this man was part of Patricia and Derek's scheme, probably positioned to make sure Ben didn't leave before they'd gathered all the evidence they needed. Jake moved protectively in front of Uncle Ben. "I think Ben's capable of deciding when he wants to go to bed in his own house." The man's expression hardened, and he reached for his phone. "I should let Patricia know you're leaving. She's been very concerned about Ben's welfare lately." That's when I realized we were out of time for subtlety. "Run," I said quietly to Jake and Uncle Ben. Jake didn't hesitate. He threw open the front door and practically carried Uncle Ben down the front steps toward the garage. I was right behind them, but I could hear the man shouting into his phone, "They're taking him. They're taking Ben." We reached the garage just as the Mustang's engine roared to life. Jake had gotten Ben into the passenger seat and was holding the driver's door open for me. I jumped behind the wheel and threw the car into reverse, backing out of the garage at a speed that probably violated every safe driving rule I'd ever learned. As we pulled into the alley behind Ben's house, I could see lights coming on in the backyard and hear raised voices. We'd been discovered, but we had a head start. As we sped through the Phoenix suburbs in Uncle Ben's Mustang, Jake was already on his phone with 911, explaining our situation to the dispatcher. "We need police and paramedics to meet us at the diner on Indian School Road," he said urgently. "We have an elderly man who's been systematically drugged, and we have evidence of elder abuse and financial fraud." The dispatcher kept Jake on the line, asking for details while directing units to our location. Uncle Ben was slumped in the passenger seat, but his eyes were clearer now, like getting away from the party had lifted some kind of fog from his mind. "I can't believe I trusted them," he said quietly. "Patricia seemed so helpful after Maria died. She said she just wanted to take care of family." "That's how predators work," I told him gently. "They target people when they're most vulnerable and isolated. This isn't your fault." We reached the diner 15 minutes later to find Marcus already there, along with 2 police cars and an ambulance. The paramedics immediately began checking Uncle Ben's vital signs and drawing blood samples to test for whatever drugs Patricia and Derek had been giving him. Marcus handed over all the evidence he'd collected, photos of the surveillance equipment, the financial documents, the fake medical evaluations, and the timeline of their conspiracy. Detective Sarah Martinez took our statements while the paramedics worked on Uncle Ben. When I showed her the photos from the medicine cabinet and described the injection sites on Ben's arms, her expression grew grim. "This is one of the most systematic cases of elder abuse I've seen," she said. "They were planning to strip him of everything, his independence, his assets, his dignity. You 3 probably saved his life." While we were talking to the detective, her radio crackled with updates from the scene at Ben's house. "All suspects in custody," came the voice. "Patricia Rodriguez, Derek Rodriguez, and 3 accomplices arrested without incident. We're securing the property and gathering evidence now." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was really over. The blood tests confirmed what we'd suspected. Uncle Ben had been given a cocktail of sedatives and anti-anxiety medications designed to keep him confused and compliant. "It's going to take a few days for all of this to clear his system," the paramedic explained. "But there shouldn't be any permanent damage. He was lucky you got him out when you did." 3 weeks later, I was back in Phoenix for Patricia and Derek's arraignment. They'd been charged with elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and a dozen other crimes. The fake doctor who'd provided the medical evaluations was arrested in California. The conservatorship hearing had been canceled, and Uncle Ben had regained full control of his finances and medical decisions. Uncle Ben looked like a completely different person, alert, energetic, and 20 years younger than he'd appeared at that terrible birthday party. "I owe you 3 everything," he said, as we sat in his kitchen, the same kitchen where this nightmare had begun. Patricia had stolen over $80,000 and was planning to sell my house and move me into a facility where I'd have no contact with family. If you hadn't trusted your instincts that night, I'd have lost everything. Marcus had been hired by the district attorney's office as a consultant to help prosecute similar cases. "Apparently, this kind of systematic elder abuse is more common than people realize," he told us. "The surveillance equipment, the fake medical evaluations, the gradual isolation from family, it's almost like a playbook these predators follow." Jake squeezed my hand. "Elena's the one who insisted we go to that party, even when something felt wrong, and she's the one who noticed Ben's condition deteriorating throughout the evening." 6 months later, Patricia was sentenced to 8 years in prison for elder abuse and fraud. Derek got 6 years as an accomplice. Uncle Ben had recovered completely, both physically and financially, and had started a foundation to help other elder abuse victims. He'd also gotten the dog he and Maria had always talked about, a golden retriever named Luna, who followed him everywhere and kept him company in the big house. "You know what the strangest part is?" Uncle Ben said to me during our last visit. "I always knew something was wrong, but I'd been conditioned to doubt my own instincts. Patricia and Derek had convinced me that confusion and memory problems were just normal parts of aging, that I should be grateful for their help instead of questioning their motives. They nearly succeeded in making me disappear from my own life." As Jake and I drove back to Tucson that evening, I thought about how easy it would have been to ignore the red flags at that party, to dismiss Marcus's concerns as paranoia, to assume that Patricia really had changed and wanted to help. "Trust your instincts," I said to Jake. "When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong, even if you can't immediately explain why." If you've ever had that gut feeling about a family situation that didn't seem right, don't ignore it. Elder abuse happens more often than we want to admit, and it's often perpetrated by the people closest to the victim. Look out for sudden changes in behavior, mysterious new medications, isolation from other family members, and anyone who seems overly eager to take control of an elderly person's affairs. And make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because next week I'm sharing the story of how a fake funeral led to the discovery of insurance fraud, identity theft, and a very much alive corpse who had to testify at his own murder trial.